Close your eyes now and let yourself drift backward through time, beyond the noise of today, beyond the rush of centuries, beyond the memory of empires that rose and fell like slow breaths in the night. You are traveling now to a place where the world was younger, where the sky stretched wider, and where the first human dreams of civilization began to take root in the fertile mud between two ancient rivers. You find yourself standing in Mesopotamia, in the land that would one day be called the cradle of civilization, but which now exists only as gentle wilderness beneath an endless dome of stars. The year is somewhere around 10,000 BCE, though years have no names here, no numbers, no meaning beyond the turning of seasons and the rhythm of water against reed-lined banks. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow beside you with the soft, eternal music that has been their song since the world was formed. Their waters are clearer here than they will ever be again, reflecting not the lights of cities, but only the moon and the scattered fires of small camps where your ancestors, humanity's first dreamers, gather around flames that dance like prayers against the darkness. You can feel the warm mud between your toes as you walk along the riverbank. This mud is sacred, though no one yet knows the word for sacred. It is the mud from which the first bricks will be made, from which the first temples will rise, from which the first tablets will be shaped to hold humanity's first written words. But for now, it is simply mud, soft and yielding, holding the footprints of deer and wild boar, of children who chase each other in games that have no rules, of women who come to fill clay vessels with the river's gift of water. The air is thick with the scent of marsh grasses and wild barley that grows in dense, golden waves across the floodplains. You breathe deeply, and the scent fills your loo, hangs with a sweetness that tastes of possibility. Somewhere in those wild grains lies the future, the moment when human hands will first deliberately plant seeds instead of simply gathering what grows wild, the moment when nomads will become farmers, when temporary camps will become permanent villages, when the long dream of civilization will finally begin to stir. You see them now, these first dreamers, moving like shadows in the pre-dawn light. They are your ancestors, though they look nothing like the people you know. Their skin is burned dark by sun and wind, their hair long and unbound, their clothes simple wrappings of animal hide and woven grass. They move with the patient grace of people who have never known clocks, never hurried toward artificial deadlines, never forgotten that time is a river that flows at its own pace. A woman kneels by the water's edge, her hands cupped to drink. As she lifts the water to her lips, droplets fall back to the river like liquid stars, each one carrying within it the reflection of the sky. She does not know that she is part of history's first chapter. She knows only that the water is sweet, that the morning is cool, that her children are safe in the reed shelter behind her, and that the grain she gathered yesterday will keep them fed for another day. But change is coming, as slow and inevitable as the river's flow. You can sense it in the way certain families have begun to linger longer in favorable spots, in the way some groups have started to experiment with keeping wild sheep and goats close to their camps instead of hunting them. You can see it in the careful way they examine the seeds they gather, choosing the largest and best ones with an instinct that is not yet knowledge, but will become the foundation of agriculture. The seasons turn around you like the pages of an unwritten book. Spring floods bring fresh silt to the plains, and in that silt, someone notices how well certain plants grow. Summer heat teaches the value of shade and shelter, leading to more permanent structures. Autumn harvests reveal which seeds store best through the cold months. Winter's harsh lessons show which animals can be kept alive through lean times and which cannot. You watch as the first crude irrigation begins. Not the grand canal systems that will one day water vast kingdoms, but simple ditches scratched in the earth with pointed sticks, directing floodwaters to patches of planted grain. The work is backbreaking, the results uncertain, but something in the human spirit refuses to give up. Each small success breeds hope for greater ones. The first permanent settlements appear gradually, like flowers blooming in slow motion. What begins as seasonal camps becomes year-round villages. Reed huts give way to structures of mud and stone. Storage pits are dug deeper, lined with clay, designed to last not just through one winter, but through many. The concept of home shifts from a temporary shelter to a place with history, with accumulated memories, with graves of grandparents beneath the floors. You can smell the smoke from cooking fires that burn in the same spots night after night, year after year. The scent carries with it the arum of the first bread, flat, coarse loaves made from ground wild grains and water, baked on hot stones. It is bread that tastes of experiments and hope, of the human determination to transform raw materials into something more nourishing, more satisfying than what nature provides on its own. As the villages grow, so does something else, the first stirrings of social organization beyond the family group. You see it in the way certain individuals begin to specialize in particular skills. One person becomes especially good at knapping flint into tools. Another develops a talent for pottery, shaping clay into vessels that are not just functional but beautiful, decorated with patterns that please the eye and suggest meanings beyond mere utility. The pottery is particularly significant, though the people making it do not yet understand why. Each pot, each bowl, each storage jar represents a commitment to staying in one place. Nomads cannot carry heavy clay vessels on their migrations, but settled people can accumulate them, can develop traditions around their making and use, can pass them down from generation to generation as the first family heirlooms. You notice how the rhythm of work changes as agriculture takes hold. Instead of the constant movement of hunter-gatherers, there are now periods of intense activity, planting, tending, harvesting, followed by quieter times when other tasks can be pursued. During these quieter periods, the first arts flourish. Stone tools become more sophisticated, pottery more elaborate, clothing more decorative. Music begins to develop beyond the simple rhythms used in hunting and ritual. Someone discovers that hollow reeds can produce different tones when blown, that animal hide stretched over clay vessels creates drums with varying pitches, that human voices can harmonize in ways that move the heart and stir the spirit. Evening gatherings arouse, and the fire become concerts of sorts, though no one uses that word. They are simply times when the day's work is done and the human soul seeks expression in sound and story. The stories themselves begin to change as settled life creates new experiences to remember and pass down. Instead of tales focused entirely on hunting and migration, narratives emerge about the founding of villages, about the first successful harvests, about ancestors who chose to stay in particular places rather than moving on. These stories become the seeds from which history will eventually grow, the first attempts to create meaning from the human experience of time and change. You feel drowsiness beginning to settle over you like the evening mist that rises from the rivers. The ancient world around you grows softer, more dreamlike, as if seen through water or tears of contentment. The voices of the first villagers fade to gentle murmurs, their fires dim to glowing embers, and the eternal sound of flowing water becomes a lullaby that has been singing humanity to sleep since consciousness first dawned. As your eyes grow heavy, you understand that you have witnessed something profound, not the dramatic birth of civilization in fire and conquest, but its quiet conception in mud and grain, and the patient accumulation of small innovations. The greatest revolution in human history happened not with the clash of swords, but with the decision to plant seeds and wait for them to grow, to build shelters meant to last, to dream of futures that extended beyond the next hunt or the next season. The twin rivers continue their ancient song as you drift towards sleep, carrying within their waters all the dreams that will one day become reality, the first cities, the first kings, the first written laws, the first literature. But those dreams are still sleeping themselves, still gathering strength in the fertile darkness of possibility. Rest now, and let the gentle current of time carry you deeper into the story of civilization's first breath, deeper into the dream of what humanity would become when it first decided to call a place home and tend it like a garden. The sun rises slowly over a landscape transformed, though the transformation has taken thousands of years to complete. You drift forward through time like a leaf on the river's current, past centuries of gradual change, until you find yourself standing in a place that would have seemed impossible to those first farmers by the riverbank. The year is approximately 3500 BCE, and before you rises Uruk, the world's first true city. The scale of it takes your breath away, not because it is large by modern standards, but because it represents such an enormous leap from the scattered villages you witnessed before. Mud brick walls stretch away in all directions, enclosing an area that shelters tens of thousands of people. The walls themselves are works of art as much as fortification, their surfaces decorated with cone mosaics that catch the morning light like geometric prayers. But it is not the walls that draw your attention most powerfully. It is the temple that rises from the city's heart like a mountain built by human hands. The White Temple of Anu stands atop its massive ziggurat, its limestone walls glowing with divine radiance in the early light. As you look up at it, you understand instinctively that you are witnessing one of humanity's first attempts to build a bridge between earth and heaven, between the mundane world of daily survival and the mysterious realm of the gods. You find yourself climbing the ziggurat's broad steps, your feet moving in rhythm with countless pilgrims who have made this ascent before you. Each step upward takes you further from the noise and bustle of the city below, further into a realm where the air grows thinner and the silence deeper. The steps are worn smooth by generations of worshippers, each footstep a prayer, each level a stage in the soul's journey to Ard the Divine. From the temple's height, you can see the entire city spread below you like a living map of human ambition. The streets wind through residential quarters where families live in houses that have evolved far beyond the simple reed huts of earlier times. These structures are built to last, their foundations deep, their walls thick enough to keep out both the desert heat and the occasional flood. Gardens bloom in courtyards, fruit trees provide shade, and the scent of baking bread drifts up from countless household ovens. But the most remarkable sight is the movement of people through the streets, not the aimless wandering of nomads, but the purposeful activity of citizens engaged in specialized tasks. You see potters working at wheels that spin with hypnotic precision, their hands shaping clay into vessels of surprising elegance. Metal workers tend forges where copper and tin are transformed into bronze tools and weapons that gleam like captured sunlight. Weavers work at looms, creating textiles that are not merely functional but beautiful, decorated with patterns that speak of aesthetic sensibilities far removed from simple survival. A gentle breeze carries to you the sound of voices engaged in something entirely new in human experience: commercial negotiation. In the marketplace below, merchants argue over the value of goods with a sophistication that suggests complex systems of measurement and exchange. Clay tokens pass from hand to hand, representing quantities of grain, oil, livestock, and manufactured goods. These tokens are the ancestors of money, the first attempts to create abstract representations of concrete value. But perhaps most remarkable of all, you hear the soft scratching of reed styluses on wet clay. Somewhere in the temple complex below, scribes are engaged in humanity's most revolutionary invention: writing. The cuneiform script they create looks nothing like the letters you know, being instead a system of wedge-shaped marks that represent not individual sounds but entire concepts. Yet in those marks lies the foundation of all literature, all history, all accumulated human knowledge. You descend from the temple as the day reaches its height and the city pulses with activity. The heat shimmers off the mud brick walls, creating an almost dreamlike quality to everything you see. In the shade of a date palm, an old scribe sits cross-legged before a young student, teaching the sacred art of writing. His voice is patient, repetitive, as he explains that this mark means water, this one barley, this one God. The student's fingers are stained with clay, his brow furrowed with concentration as he attempts to reproduce the complex symbols. Each mark he makes is a victory over the darkness of forgetting, a small triumph in humanity's war against the erosion of time. Through his efforts and those of countless others like him, knowledge will be preserved, laws will be recorded, stories will be told to generations not yet born. As afternoon fades to evening, you witness something that would have been impossible in the scattered settlements of earlier times, the exercise of centralized authority. A figure emerges from the temple complex, and the very air seems to change around him. This is the Ensi, the priest king of Uruk, a man who combines in his person both religious and political power. His presence radiates authority not through force but through the general acceptance that he speaks for the gods themselves. He wears robes of finest linen, their white purity symbolizing his role as intermediary between the human and divine realms. In his hands he carries a staff topped with symbols of his office, and on his head rests a simple band of gold that catches the dying light like a fragment of captured sun. As he moves through the streets, people bow, not in fear but in reverence, acknowledging his dual role as their earthly ruler and their connection to the gods who control the floods, the harvests, and the fate of the city. You follow the priest king to the temple of Inanna, goddess of love and war, where evening rituals are about to begin. The temple's interior is a marvel of early architecture, its walls decorated with murals that tell stories of divine intervention in human affairs. Oil lamps flicker in niches, their flames creating dancing shadows that seem to give life to the painted figures on the walls. The ceremony that unfolds before you is unlike anything from the simpler times you witnessed earlier. This is organized religion at its most sophisticated, with trained priests chanting in harmonized voices, with ritual movements that have been perfected over generations, with offerings that represent the combined wealth of the entire community. Bowls of grain, jars of oil, and animals without blemish are presented to the goddess with a solemnity that transforms mundane acts into sacred mysteries. But it is not the grandeur of the ceremony that moves you most deeply. It is the faces of the worshippers, farmers and craftsmen, merchants and laborers, all united in a common recognition that they are part of something larger than themselves. In their eyes, you see the birth of civilization's most essential quality, the ability to create shared meaning, to build communities based not just on kinship but on common beliefs and values. As the ceremony concludes and the people begin to disperse, you notice something else that marks this as a pivotal moment in human development. The temple is not just a place of worship, but a center of economic activity. Its storerooms contain the surplus grain that allows some members of society to specialize in non-agricultural work. Its administrators keep records that coordinate the complex interactions of an urban economy. Its authority provides the stability that makes long-term planning possible. The night air is filled with the sounds of a settled civilization, the distant lowing of cattle in temple herds, the murmur of conversations from rooftop gardens where families gather in the cool evening, the rhythmic pounding of grain being prepared for tomorrow's bread. These sounds create a symphony of human industry and contentment that would have been impossible in earlier times. You find yourself drawn to a quiet corner of the city where an elderly man sits beneath the stars, his fingers working automatically at some small craft, while his voice weaves stories for a circle of children. His tales are the repository of the community's collective memory, but they are also something more. They are the first literature, the beginning of humanity's attempt to find meaning and beauty in the raw material of experience. He speaks of Gilgamesh, though that name will not yet be written down for many centuries. He tells of heroes and gods, of floods and adventures, of the eternal themes that will occupy human imagination for millennia to come. The children listen with the intensity that only the young can bring to storytelling, their eyes wide with wonder at tales that transform their mundane world into a place of infinite possibility. As the night deepens and the storyteller's voice grows softer, you feel the gentle pull of sleep beginning to claim you. The sounds of the city fade to a gentle murmur, the flickering oil lamps blur into golden stars, and the whole magnificent experiment of urban civilization becomes a dream within a dream. You understand that you have witnessed something unprecedented in human history, the moment when scattered tribes became a unified community, when temporary shelters became a permanent home, when survival ceased to be humanity's only concern and art, literature, and organized spirituality became possible. In Uruk, civilization has taken its first confident steps toward becoming something more than mere survival, something approaching what we might call culture. The twin rivers continue their eternal song as you drift deeper into sleep, their waters now carrying not just the dreams of scattered farmers, but the concentrated hopes and aspirations of humanity's first city. In those flowing waters, all future civilizations are already present as possibilities, waiting for their turn to emerge from the fertile darkness of time. Time flows around you like honey, thick and golden with the weight of centuries. You drift forward through the slow dance of seasons, past the rise and fall of harvests, past the birth and death of generations, until you find yourself in an age when the very concept of kingship has evolved beyond the priest-rulers of Uruk. The year is approximately 2700 BCE, and the land between the rivers has become a tapestry of competing city-states, each one a jewel of human achievement, each one convinced of its own divine destiny. You stand now on the walls of Kish, looking out across a landscape that has been transformed by human ambition. Where once there were scattered villages connected by footpaths, now there are roads that link great cities in networks of trade and rivalry. The dust kicked up by merchant caravans and military expeditions hangs in the air like incense, carrying with it the dreams and fears of an entire civilization, learning to think of itself in terms larger than individual survival. The morning sun catches the bronze spear points of soldiers drilling in the courtyard below, their movements precise as they practice formations that will mean the difference between victory and defeat in the endless wars between cities. These are no longer the simple conflicts of nomadic tribes fighting over grazing rights or water holes. These are the systematic struggles of organized states, complete with professional armies, siege equipment, and military strategies that can be passed down from generation to generation. But even as you watch the preparation for war, you are struck by the simultaneous pursuit of beauty that characterizes this age. The very walls on which you stand are decorated with intricate friezes that tell stories of divine protection and royal triumph. The bronze weapons glinting in the soldiers' hands are functional, yes, but they are also works of art. Their hilts decorated with precious stones, their blades etched with prayers and boasts that transform instruments of death into objects of aesthetic contemplation. A horn sounds from the palace, its deep note reverberating across the city like the voice of authority itself. You turn to see a procession emerging from the royal quarters, and immediately you understand that you are witnessing something that would have been inconceivable in earlier times, the public display of absolute power wrapped in the language of divine appointment. The king of Kish approaches surrounded by the full panoply of royal authority. His chariot is a marvel of craftsmanship, its wheels bound with bronze, its sides decorated with scenes of lions and eagles that suggest the king's dominion over both earth and sky. The 4 horses that draw it are matched in color and size with a precision that speaks of royal stables maintained at enormous expense. Their harnesses gleam with silver ornaments that catch the light like fallen stars. But it is the king himself who commands your attention most completely. He wears a helmet of electrum that seems to gather all the light of the morning sun and focus it into a radiance that suggests divine favor. His beard is oiled and braided with golden threads. His robes are dyed with precious purple that announces his status from a distance, and in his hands he carries the mace and scepter that are the physical symbols of his authority over life and death. Yet what strikes you most profoundly is not the external magnificence, but the weight of responsibility that seems to rest on his shoulders like an invisible crown. In his eyes, you see the burden of kingship in an age when rulers were expected to be warriors, judges, priests, and economic administrators all at once. He must lead armies into battle, settle disputes that could tear the kingdom apart, intercede with the gods on behalf of his people, and manage the complex systems of taxation and public works that keep the city functioning. The procession moves through streets lined with citizens who understand that they are witnessing history in the making. These are not the subjects of later, more stable kingdoms who might take royal power for granted. These are people who remember when authority was more personal, more negotiable, when leaders ruled through charisma and competence rather than inherited divine right. Their cheers and bows carry with them a sense of participation in the creation of something unprecedented. You follow the procession to the great square before the Temple of Enlil, where the king will perform the morning sacrifices that ensure the city's protection. The square itself, is a testament to the organizational capabilities that kingship has made possible. Its paving stones are cut with mathematical precision, its drainage system channels rainwater with engineering sophistication, and its surrounding buildings display an architectural harmony that could only result from centralized planning and unlimited resources. The sacrifice that follows is more than a religious ceremony. It is a demonstration of the king's role as the link between human and divine authority. As he raises the ritual knife, as the sacred bull's blood flows onto the altar, as the priests chant prayers that have been refined over centuries of practice, you witness the transformation of political power into religious mystery. The king is no longer merely a successful war leader or clever administrator. He has become the earthly representative of cosmic order itself. But your attention is drawn away from the ceremony by a disturbance at the city's eastern gate. Messengers have arrived, their horses lathered with sweat, their faces bearing news that will reshape the political landscape of the region. Ur has declared war on Umma over water rights to a crucial irrigation canal. Lagash has formed an alliance with Eridu against the growing power of Uruk. The delicate balance of power that has maintained relative peace for a generation is beginning to crumble. You drift away from the immediate drama of politics and war to visit the burial ground where the kings of Kish rest in tombs that reveal both the wealth and the worldview of this early royal age. These are not the simple graves of earlier times, where the dead were buried with a few personal possessions and the hope of continued existence in some vague afterlife. These are architectural monuments designed to house the dead king's continued reign in the underworld. The tomb you enter is more like an underground palace than a grave, its walls are lined with precious metals, its floors covered with carpets that will never decay in the dry desert air. The king lies surrounded by the possessions he will need for eternal rule: golden jewelry, weapons of bronze and silver, vessels filled with grain and oil for celestial banquets. But most striking of all are the human figures that surround him. These are his servants and courtiers, his musicians and guards, who chose to accompany their lord into death rather than face a world without his protection. They lie in orderly rows, their faces peaceful, their hands still holding the instruments and weapons of their earthly service. In their voluntary sacrifice, you see both the ultimate expression of loyalty and the terrible isolation of absolute power, a king so essential to his people's conception of order that they cannot imagine existence without him. You emerge from the tomb into the afternoon light, your mind heavy with the weight of mortality that haunts all earthly power. The city continues its bustling life around you, but now you see it with different eyes. Every building, every street, every carefully tended garden represents humanity's attempt to create something permanent in the face of inevitable death. The kings who rule these cities are not just exercising power, they are trying to build monuments that will outlast their own fragile flesh. As evening approaches, you find yourself in the scribal school where the next generation of administrators is being trained in the arts of reading, writing, and calculation. Here, far from the drama of royal processions and military preparations, the real work of civilization continues. Young men bent over clay tablets are learning to record the complex transactions that keep the kingdom functioning, to write the laws that will govern future generations, to preserve the stories and knowledge that give meaning to human existence beyond mere survival. Their teacher is an elderly scribe whose fingers are permanently stained with clay, whose eyes are weakened from decades of close work by oil lamplight, but whose voice carries the authority of one who has served kings and outlasted dynasties. He speaks to his students about the responsibility that comes with literacy, about their role as the keepers of memory in a world where most knowledge exists only in human minds and is lost forever when those minds cease to function. You are learning to make marks that will speak when you are silent, he tells them, to create words that will live when you are dust. This is a power almost equal to that of the gods themselves, who spoke the world into existence with their divine words. Use it wisely, for through your writings you shape not just the present, but all the future as well. The night air is filled with the sounds of a civilization that has learned to think beyond the immediate needs of survival. From the palace come the notes of professional musicians practicing compositions that exist purely for the pleasure they give to refined ears. From the workshops come the rhythmic hammering of craftsmen working by lamplight to complete commissions that will outlast their makers. From the temple come the voices of priests chanting prayers that connect this moment to the eternal patterns that govern the universe. You climb to the highest tower of the royal palace as the stars emerge in their ancient patterns. From this height, you can see the lights of other cities twinkling in the distance like terrestrial constellations. Each light represents thousands of lives. Each city contains its own hopes and fears, its own kings and subjects, its own attempts to create meaning from the raw materials of human existence. A cool breeze carries to you the scent of distant rain, promising the floods that will renew the land and make possible another year of abundance. But it also carries something else. The dust of armies on the march, the smoke of cities under siege, the tears of refugees fleeing the endless wars that seem to be the price of civilization's advance. As sleep begins to claim you, you understand that you have witnessed humanity at a crucial turning point. The kings of this age are not just rulers, but pioneers, exploring new possibilities of human organization and achievement. Their successes will echo through millennia. Their failures will teach lessons that future generations will ignore at their peril. The twin rivers flow on in their eternal rhythm, but now their waters carry the dreams of kings as well as farmers, the ambitions of empires as well as villages, the weight of history as well as the hope of tomorrow. The temple bells ring across the morning air like silver voices calling you deeper into the mystery of faith that sustained the world's first civilization. You drift forward through time's gentle current until you find yourself in the sacred heart of Nippur, the religious center of Mesopotamia, where the god Enlil holds court over wind and storm, over the breath that fills human lungs and the hurricanes that level cities with equal divine indifference. The year is approximately 2500 BCE, and you stand within the most sacred enclosure in the known world. The Ikka, Enlil's temple, rises before you like a mountain of human devotion made manifest in mud brick and bitumen. Its walls are painted with scenes that blur the line between history and mythology, depicting the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between the structured world of civilization and the wild forces that threaten to sweep it all away. The air itself seems different here, thick with incense, sang, and expectation, heavy with the accumulated prayers of generations. Priests move through the sacred spaces with the measured steps of those who know they walk in the presence of the divine. Their white linen robes whisper against the stone floors like the sound of distant rain, and in their hands they carry offerings that represent the devotion of an entire civilization. Grain from the first harvest, oil pressed from olives that grow in temple groves, animals whose lives will be transformed into prayers rising heavenward with the smoke. You follow a procession of pilgrims as they approach the inner sanctuary, each step taking them deeper into the realm where human concerns meet divine power. These are not the desperate supplicants of later, more troubled times, but people who live in daily awareness of their place in a cosmic order that includes gods as active participants in earthly affairs. Their faces show not fear, but reverence, not uncertainty, but the confidence of those who know the rules of divine relationship and trust in their ability to maintain harmonious contact with powers beyond human understanding. The high priest emerges from the sanctuary, and in his person, you see the culmination of humanity's attempt to systematize its relationship with the supernatural. He is not merely a religious functionary, but a scholar who has spent decades learning the complex rituals that keep the world in proper balance. His memory contains thousands of prayers, each one designed for specific circumstances, rituals for planting and harvest, for births and deaths, for the coronation of kings and the consecration of temples, for averting floods and encouraging rain. But it is not just the formal ceremonies that reveal the depth of Mesopotamian religious consciousness. As you move through the city, you observe the countless small rituals that structure daily life for ordinary people. A woman pauses before her household shrine to pour a libation of beer before beginning her morning baking. A craftsman whispers a prayer to the god of his trade before beginning work on a delicate piece of jewelry. Children learn songs that are really prayers, games that teach them the stories of the gods, rules of behavior that prepare them for lives lived in constant awareness of divine presence. The gods themselves are not distant, abstract deities, but personalities as complex and unpredictable as human beings, only infinitely more powerful. Enlil can be benevolent, sending gentle rains that nourish the crops, but he can also be terrifyingly destructive, unleashing storms that flatten cities and floods that drown entire populations. Inanna, the goddess of love and war, can inspire passion that creates life and art, but she can also drive mortals to violence and destruction that leaves families devastated and cities in ruins. You witness a divination ceremony where priests attempt to read the will of the gods in the patterns of oil on water, in the flight of birds, in the configuration of sheep's livers examined with scientific precision. These are not primitive superstitions, but sophisticated attempts to decode the language through which divine intelligence communicates with human consciousness. The priests who perform these divinations are trained observers who combine religious insight with practical knowledge of natural phenomena. In the temple library, scribes are carefully copying the myths that explain how the world came to be and why it functions as it does. The creation story they preserve tells of a time when fresh water and salt water, presented by the gods Apsu and Tiamat, mingled together in primordial chaos. From their union came the younger gods, who eventually rebelled against their parents' chaotic nature and established the ordered world of civilization through divine warfare that parallels humanity's own struggle to impose organization on the natural environment. The Epic of Gilgamesh is taking shape in these scribal chambers, though it will not reach its final form for many centuries. Already, however, the essential themes are clear: the struggle between civilization and wildness, the friendship that transcends death, the quest for immortality that reveals the meaning of mortality. In this story, you recognize humanity's first mature attempt to use literature as a means of exploring the deepest questions of existence. As the day reaches its height, you observe the sacred marriage ceremony that ensures the fertility of the land for another year. The king of the city, representing the shepherd god Dumuzi, ritually marries a priestess who embodies Inanna, goddess of fertility and abundance. Their union, performed with elaborate ceremony in the temple's innermost chamber, is believed to renew the cosmic forces that make agriculture possible and human life sustainable. The ceremony is both deeply spiritual and, frankly, sexual, acknowledging the connection between human reproduction and agricultural fertility that forms the foundation of civilization itself. The participants understand that they are not merely performing a symbolic act, but participating in the very forces that keep the world alive. Their ritual coupling echoes the seasonal cycle of death and rebirth that governs all natural processes. You drift away from the public ceremonies to observe the quieter forms of religious devotion that reveal the personal dimension of Mesopotamian spirituality. In a small shrine dedicated to household gods, a family gathers for evening prayers that ask for protection through the dangerous hours of darkness. Their prayers are intimate and specific, requests for the health of children, for success in business ventures, for reconciliation with estranged relatives, for dreams that will provide guidance in difficult decisions. The shrine itself is a masterpiece of miniature art, its walls decorated with precious materials that represent months of saving and sacrifice. Small clay figurines of protective deities stand guard over offerings of bread and beer, their faces worn smooth by generations of touching hands. Oil lamps flicker before images that serve as windows into the divine realm, their flames maintained day and night as symbols of the eternal vigilance required to maintain proper relationship with the gods. An elderly woman approaches the shrine with the slow, reverent movements of one who has practiced this devotion for decades. In her hands, she carries a small clay tablet inscribed with a prayer that she commissioned from a professional scribe. She cannot read the cuneiform characters herself, but she knows that the words contain her deepest hopes for her grandson, who is preparing to join a merchant expedition that will take him far from home for many months. She places the tablet before the household gods and whispers her own prayer in the common language of daily life, asking for protection that goes beyond what words can express. Her prayer is not the sophisticated theology of temple priests, but the direct, emotional appeal of a human heart reaching out to divine compassion. In her simple faith, you see the foundation upon which all the elaborate religious systems of civilization ultimately rest. The evening air carries the sound of temple choirs, practicing the complex harmonies that accompany major religious festivals. Their voices weave together in patterns that mirror the mathematical relationships believed to govern the movement of stars and planets. Music, in this context, is not mere entertainment, but a form of prayer that aligns human consciousness with cosmic harmony. As night falls, you observe the lighting of the sacred fires that must never be allowed to die. These flames connect Earth to the celestial realm, providing a constant channel of communication between human devotion and divine power. The priests who tend these fires understand that they are maintaining not just physical flames, but the spiritual light that keeps civilization itself from sliding back into chaos. You climb to the temple's highest tower, where astronomers' priests study the movement of celestial bodies with the same devotion that others bring to earthly worship. The stars are not distant suns to these observers, but the visible manifestation of divine will, writing messages across the night sky in a language that can be learned and interpreted. Their careful records of planetary movements will eventually become the foundation of both astronomy and astrology, twin attempts to understand humanity's place in the cosmic order. The night sky above Mesopotamia is clearer than it will ever be again, unpolluted by the lights of modern cities, unmarked by the trails of aircraft. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a river of light, and in its flowing brightness the priests see the celestial counterpart of the earthly rivers that make their civilization possible. They map constellations that tell the stories of gods and heroes, creating a mythological geography of the heavens that will guide navigation and calendar making for millennia to come. As the night deepens and the city settles into sleep, You feel the gentle pull of dreams beginning to claim your consciousness. The sounds of religious devotion fade to whispers. The flickering flames blur into golden points of light, and the entire magnificent structure of Mesopotamian spirituality becomes a vision within a vision, a dream of humanity's first systematic attempt to understand its relationship with the infinite. In your drowsiness, you understand that you have witnessed something more profound than mere religious practice. You have seen the birth of theology itself, humanity's first attempt to create coherent explanations for the mysteries of existence. The gods of Mesopotamia are not just objects of worship, but characters in an ongoing story that makes sense of natural phenomena, human suffering, and the complex relationship between individual desire and social order. The twin rivers flow on through the darkness, their waters now carrying not just the practical hopes of farmers and merchants, but the spiritual aspirations of an entire civilization, learning to think about ultimate questions. In their eternal song, you hear the echo of every prayer ever whispered, every ritual ever performed, every attempt by human consciousness to reach beyond itself towards something greater and more enduring. Sleep comes to you now like a blessing from the gods themselves, gentle and complete, carrying you deeper into the ancient dream of meaning that humanity first learned to dream in the temples of Mesopotamia. Chapter 5. The Islands, where silence was born. 200 words. Time carries you across vast oceans now, away from the dusty plains between ancient rivers, across waters that have never known the wake of merchant ships or the nets of organized fishing fleets. You drift eastward through centuries and millennia until you find yourself approaching a chain of islands that rise from the Pacific like the spine of some sleeping dragon, mist-wreathed and mysterious, where an entirely different dream of civilization is about to unfold. The year is approximately 14,000 BCE, and you stand on the shores of what will one day be called Japan, though that name exists nowhere yet except in the whispered possibilities of an unwritten future. The islands stretch away before you in volcanic splendor, their peaks crowned with snow, their slopes covered with forests so dense and ancient that sunlight penetrates to the forest floor only in rare cathedral shafts of golden light. This is the world of the Joman people, though they do not call themselves by any collective name. They are the first inhabitants of these islands, arriving when the sea levels were lower and the journey from the mainland less perilous. But unlike their distant contemporaries in Mesopotamia, who are just beginning to experiment with agriculture, these islanders have found a different path to abundance, one that works with the natural rhythms of forest and sea rather than attempting to control them. You walk along a beach of black volcanic sand where the waves break with a sound like distant thunder. The air is thick with moisture and the scent of sea salt mixed with the green fragrance of countless flowering plants. Somewhere in the forest behind you, a temple bell rings. No, that is impossible, for bronze bells will not be invented for many thousands of years. The sound you hear is the wind moving through bamboo groves, creating music that seems to emanate from the very soul of the landscape. A group of hunters emerges from the forest, moving with the silent grace of those who have learned to read the land's subtlest signs. They carry bows made from carefully selected wood, their arrows tipped with obsidian points that have been knapped with artistic precision. But it is not their weapons that capture your attention, it is their faces, which show a serenity that you did not see among the more driven peoples of Mesopotamia. These are humans who have found abundance without conquest, civilization without cities. Their clothing is woven from plant fibers and decorated with patterns that mirror the natural world around them. The spiral of a snail shell, the branching of tree limbs, the flowing movement of water over stones. Each garment is not just functional, but beautiful, revealing an aesthetic sensibility that finds art in the most practical aspects of daily life. They understand instinctively what later philosophers will struggle to articulate, that the beautiful and the useful need not be separate categories. You follow them to their settlement, which sits so harmoniously within the landscape that you almost miss it at first glance. The houses are built from wood and thatch, their lines following the natural contours of the hillside, their roofs curved like the backs of sleeping animals. Gardens blend seamlessly with wild forest, making it impossible to tell where human cultivation ends and nature begins. This is architecture that serves rather than dominates the environment. In the center of the settlement stands a structure unlike any dwelling, a ceremonial hall whose interior is lit by carefully placed openings that track the movement of sun and moon across the sky. The building serves as both calendar and temple, its proportions based on mathematical relationships that the builders understand intuitively rather than through formal calculation. Here, the community gathers for rituals that honor the spirits of forest and sea, mountain and river. But it is in the pottery workshop that you witness something truly revolutionary. A woman sits before a potter's wheel. No, not a wheel, for that technology has not yet been invented here. Instead, she builds her vessels by coiling long ropes of clay, smoothing them with tools made from polished bone and wood. The pottery she creates is unlike anything produced elsewhere in the world, its surfaces decorated with cord markings that give the entire culture its archaeological name, Joman, meaning cord patterned. Yet these cord patterns are more than mere decoration. As you watch her work, you realize that each design tells a story, records an event, preserves a memory. The spiral patterns speak of the cycle of seasons, the wave-like motifs capture the rhythm of the sea, the intricate geometric designs map the relationships between families and clans. This pottery is serving the same function as writing in Mesopotamia, but through visual rather than verbal language. The woman's hands move with meditative precision as she shapes the clay, and in her concentration, you see something that will become central to Japanese culture for millennia to come. The understanding that the process of creation is as important as the final product, that the state of mind brought to any task determines its spiritual value. She is not merely making a pot, she is participating in the ongoing creation of the world itself. Children play nearby, their games incorporating elements that reveal the deep spiritual foundation of their culture. They stack stones in careful balance, creating temporary sculptures that honor the kami, the spirits that inhabit all natural phenomena. They sing songs that are really prayers, asking permission from the spirits before picking berries, thanking the deer that will provide meat for the evening meal, celebrating the return of migrating birds that signal the change of seasons. An elder sits in the shade of an enormous cedar tree, its trunk so vast that it would take 20 people holding hands to encircle it. He is teaching the young ones about their relationship with the natural world, but his lessons bear no resemblance to the formal instruction you witnessed in Mesopotamian schools. Instead, he tells stories that blend practical knowledge with spiritual insight, parables that teach hunting techniques and moral principles simultaneously. The bear in the forest is not just an animal, he explains, his voice soft as the whisper of wind through leaves. It is also a spirit, a teacher, an ancestor who has taken this form to share wisdom with us. When we hunt the bear, we must approach it with respect, take only what we need, and give thanks for the gift of its life. In this way, the bear becomes part of our family, and we become part of the forest's great family. The children listen with the intense attention that only the young can bring to stories, their eyes wide with wonder at tales that transform their familiar world into a place of infinite mystery and meaning. They are learning not just how to survive in their environment, but how to live in harmony with forces far greater than human will or desire. As evening approaches, you witness the lighting of a sacred fire that has been maintained continuously for generations beyond counting. The firekeeper, an elderly woman whose hands are marked with the scars of decades of tending flames, adds specially selected wood to the burning logs. Each piece has been chosen not just for its burning qualities, but for its spiritual significance. Cedar for purification, oak for strength, cherry for the beauty that makes life worth living. The smoke from the fire rises straight up in the still evening air, carrying with it the prayers and intentions of the entire community. But this is not the dramatic, public ceremony you witnessed in Mesopotamian temples. Instead, it is a quiet, family-centered ritual that acknowledges the sacred dimension of ordinary life. The fire connects this moment to all the moments that came before, linking the living with their ancestors and with the generations yet to be born. A flute begins to play somewhere in the gathering darkness, its notes floating across the settlement like the voices of spirits made audible. The music is unlike the complex harmonies of Mesopotamian temple choirs. Instead, it mirrors the sounds of the natural world, incorporating the call of nightbirds, the whisper of wind through grass, the distant crash of waves against rocky shores. The musician is not performing for an audience, but participating in the great symphony of existence itself. Young couples walk together along forest paths lit by fireflies that dance like tiny lanterns, celebrating the mystery of love. Their courtship follows patterns established by countless generations, rituals that honor both the power of attraction and the responsibility that comes with creating new life. They understand intuitively that their personal happiness is connected to the welfare of the entire community, that individual fulfillment and social harmony are not opposing forces but aspects of the same spiritual truth. You drift through the settlement as its inhabitants prepare for sleep, and you observe the countless small rituals that sanctify the transition from day to night. A mother sings lullabies to her children that are really prayers of protection, asking the friendly spirits to guard their dreams and keep nightmares at bay. A craftsman carefully puts away his tools, thanking them for their service and asking them to rest well so they can work together again tomorrow. The night air is filled with sounds that speak of a civilization in perfect balance with its environment. The distant call of owls, the rustle of small animals moving through undergrowth, the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. There are no sounds of conflict, no evidence of the warfare that already scars the landscape of distant Mesopotamia. These people have found a different way of being human, one that emphasizes harmony rather than conquest, cooperation rather than competition. As you prepare to sleep, you climb to a hilltop shrine where ancient stones have been arranged to frame views of sacred mountains and the star-filled sky. The arrangement is so subtle that it seems natural, as if the stones have grown from the earth itself. Yet you understand that this is sophisticated architecture designed to create spaces where human consciousness can commune with cosmic forces. From this vantage point, you can see other settlements scattered across the landscape like sparks from the central fire of human civilization. Each community maintains its own traditions while participating in a larger cultural unity that spans the entire island chain. They are connected not by roads or rivers, but by shared understanding of their place in the natural order, by common recognition of the spirits that inhabit every rock and tree and stream. The stars emerge in their eternal patterns, clearer here than anywhere else you have been, unmarked by the smoke of great cities or the dust of armies on the march. The Milky Way flows across the heavens like a celestial river, and in its flowing light you see the reflection of a different kind of human dream. Not the dream of power over nature, but the dream of partnership with it. Not the ambition to build monuments that will outlast death, but the wisdom to create a way of life so harmonious that it seems to partake of eternity itself. Slee. EP comes to you here not as an escape from the world, but as a deeper entry into its mystery. The sounds of the night forest become a lullaby that connects your dreams to the dreams of every living thing, and in that connection, you find a peace deeper than any you have known in the more turbulent civilizations of the mainland. The islands float in their Pacific silence, wrapped in mists that seem to hold all the secrets of a gentler way of being human. All the possibilities that unfold when consciousness learns to flow with, rather than against, the great currents of existence itself. Time flows like silk through your fingers, carrying you forward through centuries of gentle transformation. until you find yourself in a world of impossible refinement and beauty. The year is 1000 CE, and you stand in the imperial palace of Heian-kyo, the city that will one day be called Kyoto, at the height of what historians will remember as Japan's golden age of culture and art. The morning mist rises from carefully designed gardens where every stone has been placed with the precision of a poet choosing words, where every curved bridge reflects not just in still water, but in the minds of those who cross it. You breathe air perfumed with incense that has been burning continuously for generations, blended according to secret formulas that transform mere scent into vehicles for meditation and memory. You walk through corridors where the very walls seem to whisper with the rustle of silk robes worn by court ladies whose lives are dedicated to the pursuit of aesthetic perfection. Their faces are painted white as moonlight, their eyebrows replaced by delicate brushstrokes that suggest rather than define, their lips colored with crimson that speaks of cherry blossoms and the fleeting nature of all beautiful things. They move with a grace so studied it has become natural, each gesture refined through generations of practice into an art form that makes ordinary movement into dance. The Heian court represents humanity's most sustained attempt to create a civilization based entirely on beauty rather than power, on sensitivity rather than strength. Here, the ability to compose poetry in response to the falling of a single autumn leaf is valued more highly than skill with sword or spear. Military prowess is left to the rough provincial families who guard the empire's borders, while the capital pursues refinements that seem to exist in a realm beyond the reach of time or violence. You find yourself in the apartments of Murasaki Shikibu, though you know her only as a lady-in-waiting whose real name has been lost to history, replaced by a literary pseudonym that honors the purple flowers of her fictional heroine. She sits before a low writing desk, her brush moving across paper with the fluid grace of water flowing over stones. The characters she creates are more than mere writing. They are visual poetry, each stroke expressing not just meaning but emotion, each line embodying the aesthetic principles that govern every aspect of Heian culture. She is writing what will become the world's first psychological novel, The Tale of Genji, though she does not know that literary historians will give it such grand titles. To her, she is simply telling the story of Prince Genji's loves and losses, his search for beauty in a world where all beautiful things must fade. Her prose captures the no-aware, the pathos of things that lies at the heart of Japanese aesthetic consciousness, the understanding that beauty and sadness are not opposite emotions, but aspects of the same profound truth about the nature of existence. The soft scratch of her brush on paper mingles with the distant sound of a koto being played in another part of the palace. The music floats through the air like audible silk, its notes chosen not for dramatic effect but for their ability to evoke the subtle emotional states that Heian culture prized above all else. The musician, invisible behind screens painted with scenes of the four seasons, plays melodies that mirror the natural world. The sound of wind through pine needles, the whisper of snow falling on bamboo leaves, the gentle splash of a stone dropped into a still pond. You drift through rooms where other court ladies practice the arts that define their existence. One arranges flowers according to principles that transform a simple bouquet into a meditation on the relationship between humanity and nature. Another prepares tea with movements so precise they seem to slow time itself, each gesture part of a ceremony that finds the sacred within the ordinary act of sharing a warm drink. A third practices calligraphy, her brush dancing across paper in movements that blur the line between writing and painting. But it is not just the women who pursue these refined arts. In his private study, a court official practices the subtle art of mixing incense, blending rare woods and resins imported from distant lands to create fragrances that will perfectly complement the changing seasons. His nose has been trained through years of practice to distinguish between dozens of different scents, and his hands move with the precision of a master craftsman as he measures tiny amounts of precious materials. The incense he creates will be used in the elaborate games that occupy the court's leisure hours, contests where participants must identify mysterious fragrances based on the subtlest variations in scent, competitions that require not just knowledge but intuition, not just memory but the ability to detect emotional nuances that exist below the threshold of conscious awareness. These games are more than mere entertainment. They are spiritual exercises that cultivate the refined sensitivity that Heian culture considers the highest human achievement. As the day progresses, you observe the elaborate rituals that structure court life. Every meal is a ceremony, with food arranged according to aesthetic principles that make each dish into a small work of art. The colors must harmonize with the season, the arrangement must please the eye while nourishing the body, and the presentation must suggest meanings that extend far beyond mere sustenance. To eat at the Heian court is to participate in a form of worship that honors the beauty inherent in all aspects of existence. The afternoon brings the daily poetry competitions that serve as both entertainment and spiritual discipline. Court members gather in gardens designed to inspire particular emotional states, and they compose verses in response to themes drawn from the natural world or from classical Chinese literature. But these are not mere intellectual exercises. They are attempts to capture in 31 syllables the essence of experiences too subtle for ordinary language. You listen as a young courtier recites a poem about the sound of rain on autumn leaves, his voice modulated to express not just the literal meaning of his words, but the complex emotional associations that rain and autumn carry in the refined consciousness of his audience. The other listeners respond not with applause, but with subtle signs of appreciation, a slight inclination of the head, a particular way of holding their fans, a barely audible intake of breath that signals recognition of a particularly felicitous phrase. But even as you witness these scenes of extraordinary refinement, you become aware of changes taking place beyond the palace walls. In the provinces, warrior families are growing in power and confidence, their rough military virtues beginning to challenge the aesthetic values of the capital. The Taira and Minamoto clans drill their retainers in the arts of war, while the court composes poems about the beauty of falling cherry blossoms, and you sense that this contradiction cannot continue indefinitely. The evening brings the elaborate ceremonies that accompany the changing of the palace guard, though these guards are more ceremonial than military. Their armor is designed more for beauty than for protection, their weapons polished to mirror brightness but rarely used for actual combat. They move through their duties with the measured pace of ritual dancers, their every action choreographed according to traditions that stretch back generations. Yet there is something melancholy about their performance, as if they themselves sense that they are preserving forms whose original meaning has been forgotten. The empire they guard exists now more in the realm of aesthetic imagination than in the world of political reality, and their beautiful ceremonies cannot disguise the fact that real power is shifting to men who value steel more than silk, victory more than verse. As night falls, you join the court in one of its most characteristic activities, moon viewing. The assembled nobles gather on a terrace overlooking gardens designed to frame perfect views of the rising moon, and they spend hours in contemplation of its beauty while composing poems that attempt to capture their responses to its light. This is not mere aestheticism, but a form of spiritual practice that seeks to align human consciousness with the rhythms of the natural world. The moon that rises over the Heian Palace is the same moon that shone on the Mesopotamian ziggurats and the Joman settlements, but it is seen through eyes trained in an entirely different kind of vision. Where the Mesopotamians saw divine messages written in celestial movements, and the Joman people saw spirits dancing in the night sky, the Heian courtiers see beauty for its own sake, pure aesthetic experience that needs no justification beyond its ability to move the sensitive heart. Court ladies arrange themselves in poses that mirror the graceful shapes of the garden's carefully pruned trees, their silk robes flowing in colors that echo the subtle gradations of moonlight on water. They speak in voices so soft they might be mistaken for the whisper of wind through leaves, their conversations touching on subjects so refined that an outsider might wonder what they find to discuss with such evident pleasure. But you understand that they are engaged in something profoundly important, the creation of a form of consciousness so sensitive to beauty that it can find infinite meaning in the most delicate variations of color, sound, and scent. They are artists of experience itself, sculptors of emotion, poets of the fleeting moment that Western philosophy will struggle for centuries to understand. A flute begins to play in the darkness beyond the terrace, its notes floating across the garden like the voice of the moon itself made audible. The melody is ancient, passed down through generations of court musicians, but each performance brings subtle variations that keep it alive and fresh. The musician, invisible in the shadows, plays not for applause but for the pure joy of creating beauty that will exist for a few perfect moments and then fade into memory. As the night deepens and the moon reaches its zenith, you feel yourself being drawn into the aesthetic trance that is the highest achievement of Heian culture. Time seems to slow and thicken like honey, each moment becoming a small eternity in which consciousness can explore every nuance of sensory and emotional experience. You understand why the court can spend entire nights in contemplation of a single flower, why they find infinite variety in the subtlest changes of season, why they consider sensitivity to beauty to be humanity's highest calling. The sound of a distant temple bell reminds you that even this perfect world exists within the flow of time, that change is coming whether the court acknowledges it or not. But for now, in this crystalline moment of aesthetic perfection, you can almost believe that beauty alone might be sufficient to hold back the forces of chaos and change, that refinement might prove stronger than the sword, that the pursuit of perfect sensitivity might create a form of civilization immune to the violence that has destroyed so many other human dreams. Sleep comes to you here not as escape, but as the natural culmination of a day spent in pursuit of ever more subtle forms of beauty. Your dreams are filled with the rustle of silk, the scent of rare incenses, the sight of moonlight on carefully raked gravel, and the sound of poetry so perfect it seems to capture the very essence of what it means to be human in a world where beauty and sadness dance together in eternal embrace. The cherry blossoms are falling earlier this year, and in their premature descent, you sense the approach of change that will transform everything the Heian court held sacred. Time carries you forward through decades of growing tension until you find yourself in the year 1180, standing on a hillside overlooking the inland sea, where two great fleets face each other in what will become the decisive battle between the old world of courtly refinement and the new age of warrior rule. The morning mist rises from waters that will soon run red with blood, and you can feel the weight of history pressing down like the oppressive air before a thunderstorm. The Tyra clan, despite their military origins, have grown soft during their years of proximity to imperial power, adopting the aesthetic values of the court they once served, but retaining enough martial skill to dominate the empire through controlled violence. Now they face the Minamoto, led by Yoritomo, a man whose vision extends beyond mere military victory to the creation of an entirely new form of government, based on the warrior's code rather than the courtier's refinement. You watch as samurai from both sides prepare for battle with rituals that blend practical necessity with spiritual preparation. These are not the ceremonial guards of the Heian Palace, but professional warriors whose lives have been shaped by the constant possibility of death in combat. Their armor is functional rather than merely decorative, crafted from iron and leather with an attention to detail that makes each suit a masterpiece of protective craftsmanship. Yet, even in their practicality, these warriors cannot entirely escape the Japanese aesthetic sensibility. Their armor plates are lacquered in colors that please the eye, their helmets decorated with ornaments that speak of family pride and personal honor. The way of the warrior, Bushido, is still to Kingship in these early days, not yet codified into the rigid system it will later become, but already recognizable in the behavior of men who have chosen to live constantly in the shadow of death. You observe a young samurai performing his morning ritual of meditation before battle, his movements precise as he adjusts his equipment, checks his weapons, and prepares his mind for what may be his final day on earth. His katana is more than a weapon. It is the physical embodiment of his soul, forged by master swordsmiths who understand that they are creating not just tools of war, but objects of spiritual significance. The blade has been folded and refolded countless times during its creation, each folding representing a prayer, each hammering a meditation. The steel contains within its crystalline structure the accumulated devotion of craftsmen who see their work as a form of religious practice. Before drawing his sword for battle, the samurai performs a ritual purification that connects him to the Shinto traditions of his ancestors. He claps his hands twice to attract the attention of the kami, bows deeply to show respect, and speaks a prayer that asks not for victory, but for the strength to die well if death is his destiny. This is the warrior's paradox, to prepare for battle with such thoroughness that death becomes acceptable, thereby freeing the mind from fear and allowing skill to flow unimpeded. The battle itself, when it comes, is unlike the organized warfare of other civilizations you have witnessed. Instead of massed formations clashing in anonymous violence, this combat takes the form of individual duels between named warriors who call out their genealogies and accomplishments before engaging in single combat. Each samurai fights not just for his lord or his clan, but for his personal honor, his family's reputation, and his place in the stories that will be told about this day for generations to come. You watch Minamoto no Yoshitsune, the tactical genius whose innovations will make victory possible, as he leads his warriors in a charge that breaks conventional military wisdom. Instead of the frontal assault that tradition demands, he attacks from an unexpected angle, using the terrain itself as a weapon. His men follow him with the absolute loyalty that Bushido demands, willing to die not just for strategic advantage, but for the privilege of serving a master whose courage and skill have earned their complete devotion. The sound of battle is unlike anything you have heard before, not the chaotic noise of armies in collision, but the almost musical ring of steel on steel as master swordsmen test their skills against one another. Each clash of blades is a conversation in the language of combat, each movement a statement about the warrior's training, character, and spiritual development. Death, when it comes, is accepted with a dignity that transforms violence into a form of tragic art. But it is not just the combat itself that marks this as a turning point in civilization. It is the presence of observers, court poets and chroniclers who understand that they are witnessing the end of one world and the birth of another. They record not just the facts of battle, but the emotions, the individual acts of heroism and loyalty, the moments of beauty that can emerge even from the most violent circumstances. One chronicler describes the sight of a young Taira warrior mortally wounded, using his final strength not to strike at his enemies, but to compose a death poem that captures his feelings about leaving behind the beauty of the world. Another records the behavior of a Minamoto samurai who stops in the middle of battle to help an enemy warrior die with dignity, holding his head while he recites his final prayers. These actions reveal the emergence of a warrior aesthetic that finds beauty in the acceptance of death, honor in the face of inevitable loss. As the battle turns against the Taira, you witness scenes that will be remembered and retold for centuries. Taira warriors, faced with defeat and the prospect of capture, choose to end their lives rather than face dishonor. But their suicides are not acts of desperation. They are carefully choreographed rituals that demonstrate the warrior's ultimate control over his own destiny. They compose final poems, arrange their clothing with artistic precision, and die with expressions of such serene acceptance that death itself seems transformed into a form of spiritual achievement. The emperor's grandmother, one of the most refined ladies of the old court, faced with the collapse of everything she has known, takes the infant emperor in her arms and walks into the sea. Her final words, recorded by witnesses, speak not of political defeat, but of aesthetic disappointment. She cannot bear to see beauty destroyed by those who lack the sensitivity to understand it. Her death becomes the symbol of the old world's passing, an act so graceful that it transforms tragedy into art. But the victory of the Minamoto represents more than just a change in ruling families. Yoritomo establishes his capital not in the imperial city of Kyoto but in the rough military town of Kamakura, deliberately separating warrior government from court culture. This geographical division reflects a deeper philosophical split, the recognition that political power and aesthetic refinement, military effectiveness and courtly sensitivity cannot coexist in the same institutions without corrupting both. You travel to Kamakura in the months following the victory, and you find a city unlike anything that has existed before in Japanese history. Here, simplicity replaces elaboration, functionality takes precedence over beauty, and the warrior's direct approach to problems contrasts sharply with the court's preference for indirect suggestion and subtle implication. The buildings are constructed from plain wood rather than painted and decorated timber, their lines clean and unadorned, their purpose evident from their appearance. Yet this simplicity is not mere roughness. It represents a new aesthetic sensibility that finds beauty in the honest expression of function, that prefers the natural grain of wood to artificial decoration, that sees virtue in restraint rather than display. The tea ceremonies performed by the warrior class lack the elaborate refinements of court practice, but they possess a directness and sincerity that many find more moving than the old artificial elegance. The samurai who gather in Kamakura's halls are still learning to govern, still discovering how to adapt the warrior's skills to the complex demands of administration. They study Chinese texts on statecraft with the same intensity they once brought to mastering swordsmanship, understanding that their victory will be meaningless if they cannot create stable institutions to preserve what they have won. But they approach these civilian tasks with a warrior's mentality, seeking clear solutions rather than elegant compromises, preferring decisive action to prolonged deliberation. Zen Buddhism begins to gain influence among the warrior class during this period, offering a spiritual discipline that complements their military training. The Zen emphasis on direct experience rather than theoretical knowledge appeals to men whose lives depend on split-second decisions made under extreme pressure. Meditation becomes another form of warrior training, a way of developing the mental clarity and emotional balance that combat demands. You observe a group of young samurai practicing zazen meditation in a temple that has been stripped of all decorative elements that might distract from the pursuit of enlightenment. They sit in perfect stillness, their breathing controlled, their minds focused on the immediate present with the same intensity they bring to sword practice. In their meditation, you see the development of a spiritual discipline that will influence Japanese culture for centuries to come. The evening brings ceremonies that honor the war dead from both sides, recognizing that the defeated Taira warriors, despite their political failure, displayed the same courage and loyalty that characterizes the victorious Minamoto. This generosity toward fallen enemies reveals one of Bushido's most distinctive features, the understanding that honor transcends political divisions, that a warrior's worth is measured by his adherence to the code rather than by his success in achieving worldly goals. As night falls over Kamakura, you listen to stories being told around fires, where veterans of the great battles share their memories with younger warriors who will carry the traditions forward. These tales are already beginning to take on the legendary quality that will transform historical events into enduring literature, real people into archetypal figures who embody the virtues and conflicts of the warrior age. The storytellers speak of loyalty that transcends death, of friendships tested by impossible choices, of the terrible beauty that emerges when human beings are forced to confront their deepest values under the pressure of mortal conflict. Their voices create a new mythology for a civilization that has chosen the way of the sword, stories that will inspire and guide warriors for generations, while preserving the memory of what was lost when the age of courtly refinement came to its violent end. Sleep comes to you in this warrior capital with the sound of temple bells marking the hours of meditation and the distant clatter of bamboo swords as young samurai practice their techniques even in darkness. Your dreams are filled with the clash of steel and the whisper of final poems, with cherry blossoms falling on blood-stained armor and the sight of warriors finding beauty in the acceptance of death. The old world of aesthetic perfection has not disappeared entirely. It has been transformed, tempered like sword steel in the fire of conflict, emerging as something harder and perhaps more enduring than the fragile beauty it replaced. Time moves like incense smoke through the centuries, carrying you forward through ages of alternating peace and conflict until you find yourself in the year 1550, standing in the rock garden of Ryoanji Temple, where 15 stones rest in raked gravel, like islands of meaning in an ocean of contemplation. The Muromachi period has given way to the chaos of Sengoku, the age of warring states, and Japan has become a patchwork of competing domains where local lords fight for supremacy, while the arts of peace flourish in the protected spaces of temples and tea houses. The garden before you represents the ultimate refinement of Japanese aesthetic philosophy, 15 carefully chosen stones arranged in such perfect harmony that the human mind finds peace simple, by contemplating their relationships. Yet you cannot escape awareness that beyond these temple walls, armies march and castles burn as the country tears itself apart in pursuit of unification. The contrast creates a tension that defines this entire age, the simultaneous pursuit of inner tranquility and outer conquest, of spiritual refinement and political ambition. You walk the covered corridors of the temple, where monks practice the disciplines that have evolved from the warrior's zen into something more purely contemplative. Their daily routine of meditation, work, and study creates a rhythm that stands in sharp contrast to the violent uncertainties of the world beyond. In their faces, you see the serene acceptance that comes from understanding the impermanence of all worldly things, including the wars and political upheavals that fascinate their contemporaries. But it is not just in temples that the aesthetic traditions of earlier centuries have found refuge and new expression. The tea ceremony, refined by the master Sen no Rikyu into an art form of extraordinary sophistication, has become a realm where the warrior class can temporarily set aside their swords and rediscover the subtle pleasures that the Heian court once cultivated. In tea houses scattered throughout the country, daimyo who spend their days planning military campaigns gather to practice the precise movements and refined sensibilities that the way of tea demands. You find yourself in such a tea house, watching as Oda Nobunaga himself, the most feared and successful of the warring lords, kneels before his tea master with the humility of a student approaching a revered teacher. The man who has earned the nickname Demon Daimyo for his ruthless destruction of Buddhist monasteries and his innovative use of firearms, becomes in this intimate space simply another practitioner seeking to understand the mystery of finding the infinite within the small and simple. The tea ceremony that unfolds before you is more than mere ritual. It is a form of meditation in action that transforms the simple act of sharing a bowl of tea into a spiritual discipline. Every movement is prescribed, yet natural. Every gesture carries meaning that extends far beyond its practical function. The host's actions in cleaning the tea implements become a purification ritual. The careful measurement of tea powder becomes an exercise in precision and mindfulness. The whisking of the tea becomes a dance that harmonizes human intention with natural processes. But what makes this scene particularly poignant is your awareness of the contradictions it embodies. The same hands that fold the silk cloth with such exquisite care have recently signed orders for the massacre of entire populations. The mind that finds such subtle pleasure in the bitter taste of carefully prepared tea is also capable of the strategic thinking that has made its owner master of half the country through superior organization and ruthless elimination of obstacles. This paradox extends throughout the entire society of the Sengoku period. You observe it in the gardens that surround mountain castles built for warfare but designed with aesthetic sensibilities that rival the greatest achievements of purely peaceful eras. Military architects have learned to incorporate principles of beauty into structures intended for destruction, creating fortifications that serve as works of art even as they demonstrate the latest advances in defensive technology. The castle towns that grow around these fortifications represent a new form of urban development, combining the practical needs of military administration with the cultural requirements of a civilization that refuses to abandon its commitment to beauty even in times of constant warfare. Streets are laid out according to strategic considerations, but planted with cherry trees that will provide moments of transcendent beauty when they bloom. Markets serve the practical needs of provisioning armies, but also offer the luxury goods, silk, lacquerware, fine pottery, that maintain connection to the aesthetic traditions of peacetime. You witness the arrival of Portuguese traders and Jesuit missionaries, bringing with them not just Christianity, but firearms that will revolutionize Japanese warfare. The arquebus, the matchlock musket, represents a technology that threatens to make obsolete the sword skills that have defined samurai identity for centuries. Yet the Japanese response to this challenge reveals the adaptability that has always characterized their civilization. Instead of rejecting the new weapons, they improve upon them, developing techniques of mass production that will make Japanese firearms among the most advanced in the world. But it is the cultural impact of these foreign influences that proves most significant. Christian art begins to appear alongside Buddhist and Shinto imagery, creating a visual synthesis that reflects Japan's remarkable ability to absorb external influences while maintaining its essential character. You see this in the painted screens that decorate castle interiors, where European perspective techniques are used to create landscapes that remain fundamentally Japanese in their aesthetic sensibility. The missionaries themselves become inadvertent patrons of Japanese culture as they commission local artists to create Christian imagery that can communicate with Japanese sensibilities. The resulting art forms, paintings of the Virgin Mary that echo the graceful lines of Buddhist bodhisattva figures, crucifixion scenes that incorporate the Japanese understanding of noble death, represent a unique moment of cultural synthesis that will be cut short by later political developments. As evening approaches, you find yourself in the camp of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the peasant who has risen through military genius and political cunning to become Nobunaga's successor. Despite his humble origins, or perhaps because of them, Hideyoshi has become one of the greatest patrons of the arts in Japanese history. His portable tea house, carried with him on military campaigns, allows him to practice the tea ceremony even in the midst of warfare, demonstrating the extent to which aesthetic cultivation has become integrated into the warrior's life. The tea gathering that takes place in his camp brings together men whose daylight hours are spent in the brutal calculations of military strategy, but whose evening entertainment reveals the persistence of cultural values that transcend political conflict. They discuss poetry with the same intensity they bring to tactical planning. They examine ceramic tea bowls with the connoisseurship once reserved for weapons. They find in the controlled environment of the tea ceremony a refuge from the uncertainties of an age when political fortune can change overnight. But even as you witness these scenes of cultural continuity, you cannot ignore the revolutionary changes taking place in Japanese society. Hideyoshi's unification of the country under central authority represents the end of the feudal decentralization that has characterized Japan for centuries. His great castle at Osaka, with its sophisticated defensive systems and magnificent decorative programs, announces the emergence of a new form of government that combines military efficiency with aesthetic grandeur on an unprecedented scale. The social reforms that accompany unification, the separation of warriors from farmers, the restriction of sword-bearing to the samurai class, the standardization of weights and measures, create the foundation for the peaceful prosperity that will characterize the coming Edo period. Yet these changes also represent the end of the fluid social mobility that made figures like Hideyoshi himself possible. The very success of unification creates the conditions for its own ossification into rigid social hierarchies. You observe the construction projects that demonstrate Hideyoshi's vision of a unified Japan, roads that connect the most distant provinces to the capital, standardized systems of taxation and administration, architectural projects that proclaim the power and cultural sophistication of central authority. The Great Buddha Hall at Todaiji, rebuilt after centuries of war damage, represents not just religious devotion but political propaganda, announcing that the new regime has the resources and commitment to restore what warfare had destroyed. As night falls, you witness one of the elaborate No performances that Hideyoshi sponsors both for his own pleasure and as demonstrations of cultural continuity with Japan's classical traditions. The masked actors move with the stylized precision that the art form has developed over generations, their gestures condensed into symbols that convey complex emotional and spiritual states through minimal physical expression. The plays themselves tell stories of warriors and nobles from earlier eras, preserving in dramatic form the cultural memory of times when the relationship between power and strength and sensitivity was less problematic than it has become. The music that accompanies the performance, the haunting notes of the flute, the rhythmic beating of drums, the chanted poetry that serves as both narrative and prayer, creates an acoustic environment that seems to exist outside ordinary time. In the flickering light of torches, the performers appear to be spirits from another world, embodying the ghosts of Japan's classical past, while speaking to concerns that remain eternally present. But surrounding this artistic perfection, you remain aware of the military realities that make such cultural activities possible. Guards in full armor patrol the perimeter of the performance space, their presence a reminder that aesthetic refinement in this age depends upon successful violence, that the leisure necessary for cultural development must be purchased with the blood of those who threaten the stability that art requires. The tea ceremony that concludes the evening brings together the various threads of Sengoku culture: the warrior's acceptance of death, the aesthetic's sensitivity to beauty, the ruler's need to demonstrate cultural legitimacy, the monk's understanding of impermanence. As Hideyoshi prepares the tea with movements that have been refined through decades of practice, you see in his concentration a form of meditation that allows him to set aside, at least temporarily, the enormous burdens of ruling a country in the process of revolutionary transformation. The bitter taste of the tea, shared in perfect silence among men who spend their days in the loud chaos of administration and warfare, becomes a communion that transcends political divisions and personal ambitions. In this moment of shared aesthetic experience, the artificial distinctions that separate ruler from subject, warrior from artist, native from foreign, seem to dissolve into a recognition of common humanity, seeking meaning in the face of inevitable impermanence. Sleep comes to you in this camp of warrior aesthetes, with the sound of armor being cleaned and poetry being recited, with the sight of cherry blossoms blooming beside the barrels of artillery pieces, with the understanding that you have witnessed a unique moment in human history when the pursuit of beauty and the exercise of power achieved a synthesis that was both magnificent and unsustainable. The very contradictions that make Sengoku culture so fascinating also contain the seeds of its transformation into something more stable, but perhaps less dynamic, more peaceful, but possibly less creative. Your dreams are filled with the sound of temple bells and musket fire, with images of tea bowls and siege engines, with the voices of monks chanting sutras and generals planning campaigns. In the space between sleeping and waking, these apparent opposites begin to seem less contradictory, revealing themselves as different aspects of a civilization complex enough to embrace both the sword and the flower, the castle and the tea house, the way of the warrior and the way of beauty. The morning mist clings to the wooden bridges of Edo like memories that refuse to fade. You walk slowly across the canal, your sandals making the softest whisper against rain-dampened planks. The year is 1650, and something profound has settled over this land like snow that will not melt. The age of war has ended. The age of the sword has become the age of the brush. Behind you, Mount Fuji rises through layers of cloud, its peak touched with the first pale gold of dawn. But you are not looking back toward the mountain. You are walking forward into a city that breathes differently now. The air no longer carries the metallic tang of armor or the urgent shouts of messengers bearing news of distant battles. Instead, there is the gentle sound of temple bells, the rustle of silk kimonos, and the kwe, its scratch of brushes moving across rice paper in 10,000 rooms where samurai sit learning to write poetry instead of planning war. You pause at the entrance to a narrow street lined with wooden houses, their roofs heavy with moss and age. Through paper screens, you can see the soft glow of oil lamps where men who once wielded swords now bend over writing desks, their faces concentrated in the lamplight. These are the last samurai, but they are no longer warriors. They have become something else entirely. Scholars, administrators, poets, gardeners of the soul. The Tokugawa peace has settled over Japan like a meditation that has lasted for decades. Ieyasu's victory at Sekigahara feels like something from another lifetime, a dream of armor and horses and the clash of steel that belongs to a different world. Now his descendants rule from Edo Castle, and the samurai who once lived for battle have found themselves transformed into something their ancestors could never have imagined. Keepers of culture, students of philosophy, servants of a peace so complete it has redefined what it means to be a warrior. You turn down a side street where the morning light filters through bamboo groves, casting long shadows that sway gently in the breeze. Here stands a modest house with a small garden, perfectly tended, where every stone and branch has been placed with the care of someone who understands that beauty lies not in conquest, but in the patient cultivation of harmony. This is the home of Yamamoto Tsunetomo, though he will not be born for another 50 years. But the spirit of what he will write in his Hagakure already lives in the very air of this peaceful morning. The understanding that Bushido, the way of the warrior, must transform itself when there are no more wars to fight. Inside the house, you glimpse an elderly samurai through the translucent screen. His topknot is silver white, his hands weathered but steady as they hold a brush loaded with ink. He is writing a letter to his son, who serves as a miner in administrator in a distant province. The words flow slowly, thoughtfully, like water finding its way down a mountain. The way of the samurai, he writes, is not found in victory or defeat, but in the perfection of one's character. When there are no enemies to face with the sword, we must face the enemies within ourselves: pride, anger, the attachment to things that pass away like cherry blossoms in the wind. You continue walking, and the sounds of the city gradually awaken around you. Merchants call out their wares in voices that carry no urgency, for there is time now, endless time for everything to unfold as it should. Children run past you, their wooden shoes clattering against the stones, chasing butterflies that dance in shafts of sunlight. An old woman sweeps her front step with a broom worn smooth by decades of use, each stroke a small prayer for the continuation of this precious peace. The samurai have not disappeared. They walk among you still, but you might not recognize them at first glance. That man arranging flowers in the window of a tea house, his movements precise and deliberate. He learned that precision from years of sword practice, but now he applies it to the placement of a single chrysanthemum. The woman teaching calligraphy to a group of young girls, her brush moving with fluid authority across the paper. She is the daughter of a warrior, and she carries her father's discipline in every stroke of ink. You find yourself drawn toward the sound of running water, following a small stream that winds between houses and gardens. Along its banks, tiny shrines have been built, some no larger than your hand, where people leave offerings of rice and flowers. The water speaks in a constant whisper, telling stories of the snow that melted high in the mountains, of the long journey through valleys and forests, of the patient work of gravity and time that brings all things to the sea. At a small bridge, you pause to watch koi swimming in the deeper pools. Their movements are unhurried, graceful, a living meditation on the beauty of simply being. A samurai sits on a stone bench nearby, his two swords still at his side, for the law requires that he carry them, symbol of his rank, but his attention is entirely absorbed in watching the fish. His face has the serene concentration of someone who has learned to find the infinite in the small, the eternal in the momentary. This is what the peace has brought, the transformation of the warrior spirit into something deeper and more subtle. The samurai have become gardeners of consciousness, architects of inner harmony. They still practice with their swords, but the practice has become ritual rather than preparation for battle, a moving meditation that keeps alive the memory of what they once were while pointing toward what they are becoming. You walk on, and the morning sun climbs higher, burning off the mist to reveal the full beauty of this transformed world. In a small courtyard, you discover a tea ceremony in progress. 5 men in simple robes kneel in a circle around a low table, their movements so synchronized and deliberate they seem to be performing a sacred dance. Each gesture, the lifting of the bowl, the whisking of the tea, the respectful bow before drinking, carries the weight of centuries of refinement. One of the men is clearly a samurai, though he wears no armor and carries no visible weapons. You can tell by the way he holds himself, the controlled power in his stillness, the alert awareness in his eyes. But that alertness, once directed toward watching for enemies, is now focused entirely on the present moment. The texture of the tea bowl in his hands, the slight bitter sweetness of the matcha, the sound of his breathing and that of his companions. He has learned to apply the warrior's total presence to the cultivation of peace. As you continue through the city, you notice how the architecture itself seems to embody this transformation. The castle of the Tokugawa still dominates the skyline, its walls and towers speaking of military might, but around it has grown a softer landscape of temples and gardens, tea houses and schools where the arts of peace are studied with the same intensity that war was once pursued. In one of these schools, you pause to listen through an open window as a master teaches a group of young samurai the art of flower arrangement. Each branch, he says, his voice barely above a whisper, must find its proper place, not through force, but through understanding. The beauty emerges not from our will imposed upon the materials, but from our ability to perceive the harmony that already exists within them. The students nod, their faces serious with concentration. They are learning to see with new eyes, to touch the world with gentleness rather than strength. The afternoon stretches long and golden as you make your way toward the temple district. Here, the sound of bells mingles with the chanting of sutras, creating a musical backdrop to the quiet activities of daily life. Monks in grey robes tend gardens where every plant has been chosen and placed according to principles of balance and proportion that speak to something deeper than mere aesthetics. These are lessons in impermanence, in the beauty of things that bloom, flourish, and fade away according to their nature. You discover a small library where several samurai sit reading by the light filtering through paper windows. Their books are not treatises on military strategy, but collections of poetry, philosophical texts, guides to meditation and self-cultivation. One reads from the Analects of Confucius, another from the writings of Dogen on Zen practice. They copy passages into personal tea books, their brushwork as disciplined and precise as their swordwork once was. An elderly man looks up from his reading and catches your eye. His face is deeply lined but peaceful, his eyes holding depths of experience that speak of transformation rather than defeat. "Young friend," he says softly, "do you know what I have learned in these years of peace? That the greatest victory is not over one's enemies, but over the need to have enemies at all. The sword that cuts deepest is the one that cuts through the illusion that we are separate from the world we seek to protect. As evening approaches, you find yourself in a garden where cherry trees are just beginning to bud, though it will be weeks before they bloom. A samurai sits in meditation beneath one of the trees, his breathing so quiet you can barely detect it, his posture erect but relaxed. He has learned to embody the principle of the sword, even in stillness, ready for anything, attached to nothing, present to the eternal moment that contains all possibilities. The light fades gradually, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that reflect in the still water of a pond nearby. Lanterns begin to glow in windows and along pathways, creating pools of warm light that seem to float in the gathering darkness. The day is ending, but there is no sense of urgency, no feeling that time is running out. There is only the natural rhythm of light and darkness, activity and rest, the breathing of the world itself. You sit for a while on a stone bench, listening to the evening sounds of the city settling into rest. Somewhere in the distance, a shamisen plays a melody so achingly beautiful, it seems to capture the essence of this transformed age. The understanding that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the cultivation of what is most worthy of preservation. A final figure passes by on the path before you. An old samurai, walking slowly, his movements careful but dignified. He pauses to bow slightly toward a small shrine, then continues on his way. In that simple gesture, you see the culmination of centuries of warrior tradition transformed into something entirely new. The recognition that the sacred exists not in victory over others, but in reverence for the mysterious source of all life. The stars begin to appear overhead, the same stars that once guided warriors to battle, now witnessing a different kind of courage. The courage to live peacefully, to find meaning in small beauties, to dedicate one's life to the cultivation of wisdom and compassion. The age of the sword has ended, but the spirit of the warrior lives on, transformed into something the world has never seen before. The possibility of strength that serves only love, of discipline that leads not to conquest, but to the deepest understanding of what it means to be truly human. As you rise to continue your journey through this peaceful evening, you carry with you the knowledge that some endings are also beginnings, that the silence of the sword can be more powerful than all its singing, and that the greatest stories are often those in which nothing happens except the slow, patient transformation of the human heart.